So I want to start with this game kind of question. I mean, you've had a lot of experience dealing with trade, obviously. Is the president sort of, he knows Mexico is very dependent on a deal with the U.S. They have far too much dependence on U.S. trade to not make some kind of a deal. By moving ahead and saying, well, let's go ahead and make a deal with Mexico, and we'll see what happens with Canada. Has that been a clever, a smart negotiating tactic that might get something more out of Canada now and get the whole thing done as if they'd done NAFTA all at once?
Well, I do think Canada is going to be under a lot of pressure because, as your reporter just indicated, if they don't take this deal, it will go forward without Canada. They have until Friday. As you heard, their minister is cutting short a visit to Europe to be here in Washington tomorrow because Canada recognizes that the U.S. and Mexico have in some ways pushed it into a corner. It's a great negotiating position for the Trump administration to be in right now because it looks like Canada needs to try to find a way forward here, even though the U.S. and Mexico have made some agreements that Canada is going to find very difficult to accept.
In particular, what will they find most difficult to accept, Amy?
Well, we've heard from the Canadians that they are much more serious about the sunset clause that the Mexicans are looking like they're willing to accept, although it's a much longer clause than initially proposed by the U.S. side. But also, if we look at the anti-dumping and countervailing duties, as well as the investor-state dispute settlement mechanism, these are issues where Mexico has been willing to come toward the U.S. position, and Canada has said it's going to be very difficult. And of course, Canadian agriculture is going to continue to be a problem for the U.S. too.
Amy, do you think in terms of the U.S. strategy moving forward with Canada, with China, really is to solidify something before the midterms, help the economy a little bit, help stocks move further, or is it really dependent on what really happens that comes out in November?
Yeah, it's a good question. Obviously, we've all been looking at where U.S.-China relations are going to go since we had talks for the first time in a few months last week here in Washington. And as you know, nothing really came of those talks. I think the Chinese side now recognizes the U.S. side is fine not making a deal before the midterms. President Trump promising to be tough on China, maybe not make some kind of resolution in advance of the midterms, makes him look tougher, in fact. And so, from the Chinese perspective, I think looking at trade deals, inconclusive talks last Thursday. On Friday, we know that the administration was meeting with the Europeans and the Japanese about what together we can do about concerns with China trade issues. And then today, looking at this bilateral agreement with Mexico, pressuring Canada to come on board with it, I think the Chinese should be a little bit worried.